I grew up in a small city in Lund, Sweden, and the family I grew up in was very, very big on stories. My dad is a writer, so reading books and telling stories was something that was a big part of our life from an early beginning. I remember as a child being sat with my dad and on one side and my brother on the other side of my dad. And my dad was reading books. He was reading Moomin, Astrid Lindgren, the Brothers Grimm's of Narnia. And as he was reading these books, those stories were transporting us into different kind of places. And we traveled with those stories. We experienced places we'd never even seen before and places we'd never even been. And through those words that he was actually reading out, it took us places that we have only kind of been able to dream about before. Stories have always played a really big part in our lives. From an early beginning, we gathered around kind of fires and reading stories, and we've told tales about the stars and about gods and about astrology and everything in there. And what we're seeing now is that brands are more and more trying to tell stories as well. Everyone wants to tell their story, and everyone's got a story to tell. Storytelling has become an enormous buzzword. And it's something where we're often seeing, excuse me for 2 seconds, it's something where we're often seeing that if you can't actually tell it, you can't sell it as well. But is there actually some truth in this, or is storytelling just an actual buzzword? Until recently, we haven't been able to actually tell what impact stories actually have on the human mind and on the human kind of process. But there's been research happening for quite a while now where we can see that storytelling actually has a really, really powerful effect on our minds. It's got an ability to actually transform us and alter the way that we kind of see information and the way information is being processed. When we read dry and factual arguments, there's something around them that just makes us put our guards up. There's something that kind of makes us doubt whether that thing is actually true. Whereas if we're actually just being told a story instead, we put our guards down and we listen, we are transported with those stories and we take in the information in a different way. And storytelling isn't just important for kind of when it comes to messaging and the story we're trying to tell as a brand as well. It's really an integral part of the design process. From the early start of it to actually delivering the product to communicating to internal teams and to communicating to clients as well, as we've been hearing about before. And you can say that storytelling is at the heart of absolutely everything. There's so many different ways that we can tell a story, but in whatever way we tell it, in whatever way we create a story, the story has to kind of an ability to deliver a bit of magic and transport us somewhere. It can show us something completely new to a user. If you look at this picture here, the only thing you see is the battery. But if you do as this designer does and actually draw something around it, you see something completely different. And you no longer see the battery, but you see the diver. This one was doing the rounds in around October or November last year. It's a mother who every day when her little son is taking a nap is creating these amazing environments around, and the stories around those environments as well. It's based on characters that she's experienced, and through all of that, her napping baby becomes a baby who's going on an adventure whilst he's got his eyes closed. And that's the really lovely thing here. This shows us how simple it is to add that tiny little bit of magic and actually delivering something and taking people on a journey. So how does system relate to design? Well, when it comes to design, we got a similar thing in there as well. With everything we do, whether that's a wireframe or an actual visual as well, what is it that we want our users to see, and what is the story that we actually want to tell them? What is it that we know about the users already that they might not even know? What is it that we know about our product that we know that they're going to want to find out? And where do we actually want to take them? If you look through history, stories have always been used as a way of persuading someone, as getting people on board on a topic or a course or something, getting something that people can relate to, and using the storytelling as an igniter to action. And whatever we do, whether we like it or not, we are telling a story. Whether you are taking your users to a home page that's cluttered with information, or just got one message in there, and from there on the user finds their own way. We always take our users to a journey, or through a journey. And just as when my dad was reading the stories to us back home in Lund, they transport us somewhere, and they got the ability to actually take us to a happier place as well. Storytelling can also be really powerful as a way of giving kind of call to actions and directing people in terms of what it is that we want them to do. First and foremost, the story has the ability to really capture our attention and move away from those dry factual things and actually go, what is this thing? I want to find out more. I want to find out what this product, this company is actually about. And from there on, we can demonstrate authenticity. We can show them how this is actually relevant for them as a user. We can show that we can motivate them, and through building trust and through telling our story in the right way, we can create connections and create a relationship that can turn a user from being a passive one into an active one and into an advocate of our brand and of our products. So what then actually makes for a good story? If you look at it really, really simple, the story's got a beginning, it's got a middle, and it's got an end. When it comes to writing plays and literature, you talk about dramaturgy. I'm not entirely sure how to say that word in English, but I'm guessing it's something along the realms of that. And dramaturgy is all about knowing how to actually structure, how to apply and structure a story. It forms the kind of context for which that story takes place and for how you're actually delivering that story as well. And Aristotle was the first one who actually pointed out that there was a clear connection in the way that we're telling stories to the effect it actually has on human behavior as well. And in dramaturgy, you talk about a 3-act structure, where you start out with the first act, which is the setup act. You've got an inciting incident, something happens to the main character that leads to plot number 1, that is a turning point. Something that's going to change the story forever, and things might not ever really be the same. This is where you start to wonder, well, will the guy actually get the girl? Then you move on into the second act. This is the midpoint where the main character really starts to develop, where he gets to know himself. He might be faced with a new situation where he needs to learn new things, or he might be learning new things about what he as a person can actually do. And this point, there's a plot point number 2, which leads on to the last phase, where the story really comes to a climax and the dramatic question is being answered. Did the guy actually get the girl? And you can apply that same thing to user-centered design in whatever things that we do. Because when we look at these kind of 3 acts, and whether we look at them throughout the first kind of the whole product life cycle, from first finding out about a product to post actually purchasing a product, or whether it's just within a stage of that product life cycle, there's always different phases that a user is going to go through. You might have the first phase, which is more kind of action-oriented. Something happens that causes the user to come to your site. The second phase is all about them trying to do some research and evaluating and trying to figure out if this is actually for them. They start to make a decision. And then in the final act, that's where they reflect on what they found out and then make the final decision and make an action based on that decision. So in this case, it could be about, in the first act, finding out about your product, starting to considering it, and in the second act, starting to doing a bit of research, which leads them towards making a decision, and then in the final act, actually buying it, or perhaps deciding, I'm not going to buy it from you, I'm going to buy it from one of your customers, or from your competitors. I called my dad back in Sweden when I was kind of writing the outline for this talk last year, and he was giving me some advice on what he usually makes or incorporates when he writes stories as well. The first thing he said was that it really, really needs to capture the imagination. And this quote is from the co-creator of American Horror Story, who says that if you can imagine yourself in a situation, it's infinitely scarier. And although we don't really want to scare our users, it really points to something very important. We are trying to create something that is believable. We are trying to create something that users can actually relate to. And in order to do that, we need to know who our users are. We need to know what it is that makes them click, what it is the information they are looking for, whereabouts in their story they are, and whereabouts in their journey they are. And where do we actually want to take them, and where do they actually want to go? Steve, an old colleague of mine, said that he always looks at what the design is trying to do and about telling the right story to the right person, and that's really, really important in whatever it is that he's producing, whether that's a complete site redesign or just one kind of view. The second part of my dad was the dynamic of the story. So in every story, there are relationships between events and between people, and it's the same when it comes to doing product design and site designs as well. There's a story that's being told, and that story has a beginning, whether that's a campaign because you're creating something that you really want to create excitement about, or whether it's just about delivering a product and actually selling that product. there's always some relationships, and there's always a backstory that our users have as well. How do they actually land on our website? We can know from analytics, but we might not know the exact kind of state of mind or what caused them to come to our site. And when it comes to the dynamic of the story as well, it's also about looking at the red thread and looking at how every single piece of content that we have on our pages, how they fit together on the pages themselves, but also across pages. And the third part is that there should be an element of surprise. So the same guy, the co-creator of American Horror Story, he talks about that with any story, any kind of scary story, and this was a Fast Company article about how do you write a good horror story. With any one of those, he said, you need to know roughly where the story is going, but you don't need to know, and you shouldn't know what's going to happen to every single character. You don't want to know that a certain person is going to die, or that a certain person is going to become important. You want to know that something is there, and you want to know that you might, be traveling from, as he mentions here, New York to LA, but you don't need to know the exact route that you're going to take there. And it's the same thing when it comes to product design. A lot of what we do is trying to figure out exactly what our users are about. What is it that they're trying to get out of it? Where do they want to go? And we try to do call to actions and signposting to make sure they really get there. But we should also include an element of surprise and delight. Something that can wow them and give them that kind of unexpected kind of experience, something they didn't actually count on. It's also really important for keeping their attention and making sure that they themselves can go on a journey and actually explore what we are about. So whilst we should definitely plan out all of the content and how it's going to be structured and the ideal path that we should take, that we want to take our users on, we should also let them walk their own kind of way. We should try to consider what actually the flow of the content on a page can do on its own, how the page and the content on that page and how this kind of call to actions within content, how that can direct users as well, and not just having your main navigation. There's quite a lot of development now in how we can deliver stories in the different ways. We've seen it with New York Times, the BBC are just doing it with I Wonder, I believe it's called. And if you look at Medium, that's one good example of how you can actually relate, in this case, comments to a particular point in a blog post. So there's a lot we can do when it comes to storytelling and making sure that we can capture users' attention and deliver stories and content in a non-linear way. So how do we then actually go about it? Well, it all starts, we're going back to this one, and actually mapping out. Andy was mentioning the Kano model before and how there's certain things we see down there called hygiene that just needs to be there in order for the experience to even be worthwhile for the users. And then you've got the kind of feel-good factors. Those is going to be a tiny bit element of a surprise. And then at the top, you've got the delight, the big wows, the big things that are really going to make your users kind of super excited and want to engage with your product, and what's going to potentially get them over certain hurdles. So when it comes to defining products, it's about identifying where we want a user to be throughout the dramaturgy of the product designs that we are doing as well. So we need to look at from a user's point of view, but also from a business point of view, about the point where we actually want to delight them. So it's about going back to this and pointing out, well, when it comes to Act 1 and first becoming aware, that might be the first point where we really want to give them a wow factor. And then later on when they make a decision, we again want that to be a really, wow, I feel good about this. And after they've kind of made a decision and bought our product, after they leave, we want them again to be really, wow, and really excited and tell all their friends about it. So look at those points where you actually want to delight them. And also look at where there might be particular hurdles. So do you have, for example, a really long form that could cause drop-offs? Or are there some other things that can make it really hard for users to get over to the next point, to get them to the next act, potentially the third act, that's the one that really matters. So identify those and let those be a guide as well on kind of how you structure your story. And make sure you plan for different kind of entry and exit points as well. We know now that Google is often the first kind of homepage that a user ever sees when it comes to experiencing our sites or our products. We no longer can rely on that people are going to come through the homepage and go straight in through a direct path through the site. They're going to come through shared links and through searches and land in different places. So we need to make sure that the story works from whatever place they land on. And in order to do that, we need to know, of course, the content, the functionality, the interactions, all those things that can support and meet the needs of the users, but also us as a business. And it's about making sure that we've got a good balance and that we don't create an experience where everything lies in the delight factor, because we can't withstand that as a business or as a user. It means we're going to be on crack the whole time, and we're going to have really excited people in-house and really excited users trying to make a decision and do something, and it's just not going to happen. So instead, we should try for something that feels a bit more kind of natural, a bit more realistic, and identifying those kind of main points where we really want to put in a bit more and really wow our users. And this is also where we have an opportunity to deliver the right content at the right time. So this can be around making sure, again, we know who we're actually designing for, what we want to say, and where we want to take users and what we want users to do. And in order to do that, of course, we need to know who the users are. And as we all know, not a single user is the same. But we can identify the main kind of user types that we are dealing with, and also look at the smaller user types or the user groups as well, and make sure that something meets the needs of them. And then identify and prioritize content and functionality for each one of those. And there's clever technology that we can use as well. So dynamic publishing was used at the London or the BBC Olympic sites, for example. Building things modularly and then defining rules for when to display a certain module can allow us to do tailored views for different users and different kind of stages in the product lifecycle as well. Because context and kind of prior knowledge plays a really key role as well. If you are telling a story to a 3-year-old kid and you're then telling the same story to a 15-year-old kid, you're not telling the story in the same way. And the same thing comes when it relates to kind of products. You don't talk about someone who knows everything. You don't tell them all the little details, but you cut to the point. So try to tailor your messaging and how you the kind of language you use as well to the person in question. And if you're dealing with sites that span multiple locations and multiple languages, make sure you know how to adapt the message to make sure it meets those needs as well. Saying something in one way over in the US versus in China might meet a different or need and relate to different kind of reactions. So it's really about understanding who our users are, and also acknowledging that the visit intent is going to be different if a user comes and experiences your site for the first time versus if they come and have been on your site a long time before. And make use of different ways of engaging your users as well. There's loads that we can do now that pages are getting really long with infinite scrolling that can draw the user's attention back in and give them a tiny bit of delight. This is a long product page that I actually did, where we inserted kind of different modules into the grid, and we saw this at another kind of e-commerce site, and it worked really well on that site as well. So if you have really long pages, what is it that you can do to actually delight them and surprise them and capture their attention as well? And something you see a lot now when designing for multiple devices at the end, kind of make sure you use that end as a way onwards as well and keep telling that story. And speaking of multiple devices, make sure you consider and adapt your message. So what is it you're trying to say in your emails, on social media, and on your web? And also make sure that your message is delivered properly across all those different devices as well, and is kind of kept and delivered in the right order. This is something Trent Walton talks about as content stacking strategy, and making sure that we prioritize content on desktop and on mobile and define exactly how it's going to reflow when the screen sizes move into a smaller thing and things are moving around. How do we want those content modules to actually flow in there? So whatever we do, when it comes to doing a good piece of UX or a good piece of design or a page, everything we do communicates something. And whether we like it or not, whether it's to internal team members or whether it's to clients, everything we do is selling something. And if you want to change the mind of one person or the whole world, it often starts with some kind of story, a once upon a time, and actually relating something back to the users. Or in this case, if you so wish, once upon a design. And with that.